Thanks, Scotty. It's been an absolute pleasure to be here with you all. It's if there's anywhere I go in the world that feels like family, it is Wellington, and I'm very thankful for that. Even yesterday, I actually had a massive migraine yesterday afternoon, and I had people serving me, I'm going to tear up, and bringing me food, and I was way away from home, yet people dropped food on my doorstep and really looked after me. So thank you for being, I think, fully what the people of God is supposed to be, but it isn't always what you see. So you have something very special here, and I want to encourage you that what you have here and in this community is a very unique thing. Scotty said I was very generous with my time, and the truth is that Microchurches Australia had grown with lots of contacts in New Zealand, and I did not have space or time or capacity, and Scotty generously said, give them to me, I'll follow them all up. And I was like, bless you, mate, thank you. So it was an absolute pleasure to work with Scotty over the last few years and to see this really come to life. This is a beautiful thing. And I think we've had an incredible couple of days together. When I look around this room, I am so thankful for all the different stories that I've heard, the journeys that God has you on, the things that you're learning and you're wrestling with, and just the ways that you're choosing to step out and follow Jesus, even if you have no idea what that means. Welcome to the club. And I think we've heard over these few days some different challenges that lay before us. You know, we've heard the challenge that we do live in changing times. We are in a complex post-COVID world. It's a different world, and some of our old ways will need to change as we step forward. Thankfully, God has provided us people who have learned to navigate different paths, those on the margins, those who are already working with Jesus towards what he wants to do in those spaces. We live in changing times, but God is already providing for us in those spaces. I think we've also heard that we're hungry for revival. There is a hunger in this room. Have you felt it? Yeah, there is a desire to see God's kingdom come, and I think that is super exciting, to see it come in all its fullness in every town and community, even the places I have no idea where they are in New Zealand. It's been great to try and learn and work out who's more southern than who. We want to see God's mission fulfilled in our time. We want to be those people of white hot faith wherever God has placed us. And I think the third thing I've heard the challenge of over the last few days is that we as leaders are imperfect people, yet God is full of grace for us anyway. We're going to make mistakes. I've made plenty. We're going to want to quit and give up. I've done that too. And we're not going to lead perhaps as we should. But God is bigger than all of that and can use us even in our brokenness and our ways that we've fallen short. But I think I've become really convinced that if we're going to bring about some of these changes that we need to see in our church and in our world, I'm really convinced that one of the things that we need to do is review the way that we develop and form leaders for that task ahead of us. More than this, I think we actually need to develop a whole new kind of leaders that perhaps we haven't invested in before for these tasks. So if you've spent any time with me, you'll know that even though I might be well known for microchurches, the thing I am most passionate about beyond anything else is developing leaders. I love walking alongside leaders, helping them to grow, helping them to wrestle with God, and just seeing where that wrestle takes them. You see, my own leadership journey has been a challenging one at times. I was a young upstart leader, and I found very quickly I didn't belong. I was called into ministry in my first year of uni, and I thought that was amazing until I sat down with my, I won't name the ministry, so university Christian student worker, who said to me, you should stay in law. You can serve God there better. And I was like, wow, welcome to ministry. And my journey over the years has been challenging because I am not a pastor, teacher, church leader. I never will be. I'd love to be some days, because some days I think that'd just be a heck of a lot easier. But I'm not. That's not what God's wired me for. But I also found as I grew as a leader that I also wasn't one of those typical church plantery types. I don't know if you have that in New Zealand. I get the feeling that you don't have it as much as we have it in Melbourne. You know, the entrepreneurial, roll your brand out, pick up 30 people, place them somewhere, and, you know, you're all A-type personality and out there and rah, let's go plant a church. That wasn't me either. And so, to be honest, for a lot of my life, I felt lost in the middle. I felt like someone who didn't belong in standard church, but didn't belong over here with these kind of entrepreneurial, I'm trying to think of nice words for it. You know what I mean, don't you? You do. People who would call themselves entrepreneurial and innovative. So I actually strayed away from those words because I didn't want those words to label me in that same camp. But I did find there was another group of leaders out there, a group of quite humble leaders who did often end up planting churches, although that may not be what they started to do. Maybe they just started to move in and serve in a neighbourhood in a particular way, and they accidentally planted churches. Our original intent with our microchurch network at GWAC was just to move into the neighbourhood and have a local impact. We weren't even really sure if what we were doing was church. It took 10 years for the Anglican Church to decide that what I was doing was church planting. It probably took 5 for me to label it that way. But this was a quieter group, a group that stayed out of the spotlight, a group that was humble, a group that was less likely to see what they were doing as innovative at all. Actually, this group would often just describe it as, I just followed Jesus. Jesus said, and so I went. And I remember reading, has anyone read Chuck DeGroat's book, When Narcissism Comes to Church? Whew, don't. I mean, yes, do, but don't. One of the things he does is he aligns a church planting assessment that's often used for some of those sorts of groups with a narcissistic personality inventory. And I can tell you they align far too well. If we know why there's difficulties in some of our long-term church plants, I can tell you they are picking the people for those problems without realising it, I think. And so it left me wondering and wanting to answer this question, how do we differentiate from those leaders that are humble and that end up planting churches but are doing so out of the spotlight and really kind of hands on the ground, dirty, you know, getting in the grime of life from church planters? Because what I was doing as it started to grow at GWAC, I was starting to be put in that box. And I was like, I don't fit in that box either. And so I actually went about doing quite a serious study, which some days I regret. But I did a doctorate of ministry, and really I wanted to answer that question. How do we raise those sorts of leaders, those innovative missional leaders? Not necessarily church planters, because depending on what sort of church they're planting, they're not very innovative. They're just picking up people and putting them in a location and doing what they've always done. So how do we raise innovative missional leaders, in the Australian context, but I think we're closer than most other places around the world. How do we actually raise these people? What does it look like to develop these people so that we can change our system, so that we can change our colleges, so that we can change what we do with our young people to prioritise the right things? Because I had this feeling that actually most of what I look at in these people and that I see as innovation was probably the same as me. They just saw what Jesus was asking them to do and responded in obedience to that. And so I defined innovative missional leadership, because you have to for these sort of things, as influencing others to respond to the invitation of God to co-create with him new value in line with his mission in the world. That's a very wordy academic way of saying there's a theology of innovation that's been written by a guy called Larry Vincent. And he basically frames innovation as just responding to the invitation of God. You can be an innovative leader if you are just responding to what God is asking you to do and doing whatever it is in that space. And so a lot of people have done some work in this area. One of the books that I read first up when I was trying to identify where I belonged in this world was a book called The Pioneer Gift by Kathy Ross. If you consider yourself a pioneer and you haven't read it, it's well worth the read. It was one of those real aha moments for me. But I read the book, and a couple of things I thought, that's not the same in the Australian context. And so this is what I kind of went on to do. So as you talk about how you develop innovative leaders, there's a lot of different views. And this matters because depending on where we think this comes from, the way we go about developing it is completely different. Fresh Expressions from the UK is very much, it's about calling, supported by skills and training. So anyone can have that call and then they can have the skills and training to go with it. Ellen Hirsch is very much about gifts. You have the apostolic gift or you don't. And it's as simple as that. Missional Entrepreneurship is another group of research which says it's all skills and experience. You can teach this to anyone. And that might be true. But let me share with you some of what I found. So my research really sought to take some of the best innovative leaders that I could find around Australia, and some of them I did actually have to go find because these aren't people who shout out what they're doing from the rooftops, but find those who had planted something, who had done something in response to what God had been doing, something that had sustained for a significant amount of time, that had resulted in being a primary faith community for whoever it was that they were trying to serve. So something that actually had some legs on it over a period of time. And I basically did three things. Firstly, I did an assessment of their spirituality using something called the Spiritual Assessment Inventory. Wanted to look at what was their relationship with God like? How is it different from mainstream Australians? Then I wanted to look at their personality. So is this personality driven? Or is it not? And then I did what I call life mapping research, which basically means sit down with them and get them to map out their whole story. And then across all the participants that I had, I was looking for those themes. How is God working the same in each one of these participants? And I'm hoping that this would be helpful for us. It highlights a few key things, but let me give you some of the research for those who might be as nerdy as me and enjoy that. So this is a spiritual assessment inventory. Thankfully, a friend of mine was doing an Australian-wide research on this in the general population at the same time. Oh, I should flag, you are very welcome to take photos and use it, but please don't write up the findings of my research or the originality of my doctorate might be problematic because it's not yet published. But you're welcome to take photos. So the light blue is Australian Christians. So this is not yet published research from somebody else's PhD that says this is how they relate to God. The first one is awareness. Their awareness of God's impact in their life, their awareness of what God is saying to them. With an average Australian, it's actually really high. 3.5 is really quite impressive. The second one, though, is the real massive difference. This is a huge difference between our innovative leaders and the Australian population. And it's called realistic acceptance. And what it means is that when you hit something hard, like something happens that you don't expect it to, do you get angry at God? Do you blame God? Or do you say, God is God and I am not, and I move forward and trust him anyway? And that is the posture that we saw in our innovative leaders. And those numbers are higher than I've seen in any other study I've been able to find. It's not that they are necessarily more spiritual, but there is something there with an incredible trust in God that drives them deeply to say, even if it all goes pear-shaped, I trust God. And most of the others are very, very similar. So then I looked at personality. For those of you who have a psych background like me, it's an IPIP Neo 120. It's basically the 5 major domains of personality. Basically, there's nothing in it about personality. The first 2, extroversion and agreeableness, are slightly higher, 1 standard deviation above the mean. That just means they're a little bit more prone to be extroverted. They're a little bit more prone to be agreeable. Did you hear that? My innovative leaders, we are actually more prone to be agreeable, to work well with others. It's interesting because when you compare it with the typical picture of a church planter, that's not necessarily the same. The one that's almost statistically significant, but just not quite, is our neuroticism. We are statistically almost 2 standard deviations below the mean, which means we are less angry, less frustrated, less disappointment, actually just more able to control ourselves. But what I think is most interesting in this is the last one is called openness. That's creativity. That's all the new thinking, the ways of thinking differently. We are not particularly creative. We are average. This is not coming from their personality. If you look at these ones, these are just the subdomains of all of those. But you can see the lowest areas are things like anger, anxiety, self-consciousness, depression, and vulnerability. These are healthy people. That's what this is saying. It's really just saying they are healthy people and they're people, trust, altruism, cheerfulness, friendliness. These are helpful, healthy people who want to be with other people. And I think that bursts the stereotype that we sometimes think of when we think of the innovative church planter leader. This is a different group of people. And so then I went on and did the research with the life mapping interviews, and basically I spent a ridiculous amount of hours to tell you that there are 5 things that seem to be really similar across these groups. And so I'll build them like building blocks because that's the way they happened in their stories. The first one is there is some sort of formation for innovation really early in their stories. Some of it is nature, some of it is nurture. Some of them call it gifting, some call it calling. Some say it's because their parents were innovative. There was something in there that they named that at a very early age they could feel or sense or see things differently than the world. But partnered with that is that they found they had some sort of early experience of actually having that positively nurtured. Whether it was their first church after they came to faith or their youth ministry when they were a young person, they put their hand up to do something. And some of them are hilarious. One of them wanted to run a Christian concert. And so they ran a Christian concert. But they put their hand up early and someone said yes. I can't overestimate how important this was for their development. When you talk about the development of women, and particularly the development in leadership, there's a time when they basically just keep getting knocked back, between 8 to 12. And basically all the work we've got to do with women leaders to help them push up is to do with what happened between the ages of 8 and 12. It's similar here. If we knock these leaders back early, my guess is we wouldn't see them here. So I was only researching the ones that had made it to the end, and my guess is there is a whole lot who have got that sort of natural ability there, but we say no to earlier. The ones in my study were people that someone said yes to. This is probably the biggest finding of my study, though. The most important aspect of an innovative missional leader was their strong attachment to God. Attachment to God is not an obvious, it's an obvious thing. We should be strongly attached to God. But this comes out of kind of attachment theory and thinking about the depth and the strength of our relationship to God. And I can tell you, for each one of them, it came at a cost, a serious cost. So members of my study were homeless, lost their spouses or children, had massive church conflict that was not of their doing or of their instigating. I can't remember them all, and I'm trying to not give anything away about who these participants were. But all of them, except one, all of them had really harsh, strong circumstances that they had to live through. One of them is 25, so the people in my study range from 25 to 65, hasn't had that yet, but had an incredible, miraculous thing happen that had the same effect. Basically, whether it was miraculous or whether it was difficulty, each one drew themselves closer to God in those and formed a trust in Him that is actually what empowers their innovation moving forward. They trust Him so deeply that they are willing to follow when He calls. This is not what we see when we look at innovators. We see the things that they do. We sometimes miss what's going on, what I call beneath the line. But the third one that partners with that is their awareness of their own limitations. Not only do they have a strong view and relationship with God, but they have a strong view of who they are. They know who they are. They know what gifts they bring, but they also therefore know what gifts they don't bring, and they gather a team. One of the things that's different between my research and some of the stuff that's come out around the world is that a lot of pioneers feel isolated. My pioneers in Australia basically had survived that by gathering their own people around them. So one of them was meeting up with a group of pastors around the area who weren't at all pioneering but were life-giving for him. They'd all gone and found, some of them had mentors overseas that they'd gone and kind of basically attached themselves to until they agreed to mentor them. They went and found someone so that they weren't alone. So if you want to last the kind of long distance, in ministry and you're feeling alone, can I tell you, no one's going to provide that for you. I wish they would, but they won't. And maybe that's good because it forces you to go and build that network around you. Go and reach out to someone. If there's someone you've met here that would be helpful, reach out to them and say, hey, you want to hang with me? You want to be my support? It's similar to what the underground guys are talking about, the missional peers. They said that were valuable to hold one another through. That's what came out in my study. These guys knew that on their own they weren't going to make it. On their own they couldn't do everything. They knew where their gifts lied. They knew where their gifts didn't lie. And so they sought out help, partnership and team from others so that they could complete what they felt God was calling them to. And I think those three things are what's below the line of a lot of innovation. There's some level of formation and early experience. There's a deep relationship with God, and there's a healthy knowledge of their self. And those three things we may not see in our innovative leaders, but they are what's below the line, kind of empowering the things that we do see. One of those things is, of course, the ability to kind of see opportunities, see where God is at work, answer that call of God, and follow without fear of failure and risk. Every single person, very Aussie, in my study, almost every single person had some version of, I just gave it a try, I just gave it a go, I gave it a whack, whatever phrase you wanted to use. They were just giving it a go. And most of them, what they're known for now wasn't their first go. They actually had quite a few, but you only know them by their last attempt because it's the one that actually stuck. But they were willing to have a go because they were so secure in who they were, and they were so secure in what God had for them and their relationship with God, that failure didn't matter. Failure wasn't going to impact who they were. Failure wasn't going to impact their relationship with God. And so they're willing to step out where others may not be willing. I actually have a bit of a theory, and it's not tested, it's not part of my research, that lots of people see those gaps. The gaps that we see innovators step into, I think lots of people see them. But it's only this stuff below the line that empowers those innovative leaders to actually step out and step into those gaps. And then the final one, I think, is quite obvious if you've been in this game long enough. It's about reflecting and learning. They were people who went, the first one didn't work, but that doesn't mean I throw it all out. There's something that I can learn from that, and I can try it, take it and try again and try again and try again. And they had this habit, not just with their missional initiatives, with their life, with their marriage. That didn't work. What do I need to learn? They were multi-input learners. Like, they were people who were looking to learn from everything, not just from theological colleges, not just from books or podcasts, but from, they walked down the street and they did something. And so they learnt from that. And they turned that into a tool that they used in their ministry. They did something once with someone and they realised how effective it was. So they took that and they kind of codified it for use with others. It's that constant process of just learning from what God is doing in and around them and reflecting and changing it. So what does this mean for us as we talk about how we go about developing these sort of leaders in our midst? Well, I think the first thing for us is, if you have young leaders or new Christians in your group, I want to encourage you to notice, to look for the ones who are curious, to look for the ones who are annoying you like I did and asking lots of questions. Look for the ones that have that question about, why do we do it like this? Or the ones who say, can I do this really wacky thing? It might be a bit different. There is so much you are going to give to someone if you're willing to say yes. So I want to encourage you, when you're starting to develop leaders, this starts when they are like 14, 15, 16. When they have an idea they want to test out, see if you can make your base response yes. Instead of looking for a reason to make it yes, look for a reason why you shouldn't, like maybe it's not safe or things like that. But notice and allow. Have your eyes on your leaders around you, looking for people like this. They might annoy you, but they're really valuable. Form them deeply. The most important gift you can give to a leader that you are developing is a deep attachment to God. Do you know there are 3 things, research by a guy called Grant Bickerton in Australia, he's done research into what stops pastors burning out. There are 3 things that he labels. 1 is their calling. The second is what he calls collaborative spiritual coping resources, which basically means missionary peers, right? Other people around you who are going to support you. The third one, a high attachment to God. So not only is this a good thing, something that drives our innovative leaders, it is actually essential for you staying in the game long term, which might be because I'm looking at people who have done this for a while, might be why we're seeing this. If you want to stay in the game long term, forming people deeply. And I would say even pointing their eyes to Jesus in the midst of the hard times, but not necessarily rescuing them from the hard times. Because their depth of relationship with Jesus comes from walking in the hard times. And so can I encourage you, if you are in the middle of one of those really tough seasons where it does feel like you want to quit and life's, a lot harder than you might like it to be, the simple act of continuing to turn back to Jesus and to trust him to deliver you out of that will develop you just in incredible ways as a leader moving forward. So give that gift to the leaders around you that you're developing. Care more about where they are with Jesus than what program or what things they were supposed to do for you that they didn't do. I've got a young leader that I've worked with for quite some time, and I'm always, the first question I ask this young leader is, where are you at with Jesus? And when things are going wrong in ministry, the first thing I'm thinking is, where are you at with Jesus? Because actually, if that's not right, the rest of it's not going to be right. That's got to be our first question. The third one is help them to grow alongside others. Help them to invest in their own self-development, their own awareness of their self, their skills, whether that's their personality, whether that's their giftedness, whether that's what skills they've got to bring to the table of who they are. Help them identify who God has created them to be and connect them with others. Like for many of us, nobody ever connected us with others. One of my favourite things to do, and I've done it with a fair few people in this room, is to build cohorts of leaders. I run these monthly cohorts with lots of leaders and I don't have any content for them. I just turn up and we all say, hey, what's God saying to you at the moment? And then we float around and we hear it and we talk about it and we say, okay, what are we going to do in response to that? What do you need to do? We just show up and grab leaders together, 6 to 8 leaders on a Zoom call once a month. It's really simple. Help them to grow with others. You don't need a big program. You don't need anything fancy. You just need to help them grow in their own self-awareness, which naturally happens when we rub up against others, and in their ability to build a team of missionary peers. The next 2 are probably the more obvious ones. We need to support them to experiment, to help them to have a go, to let them fail and to let them learn and to let them try things and not make it the end of the world. Because when their first thing fails, they'll want to quit. And the most important thing you can do is actually reframe that failure as a learning opportunity. I don't allow us in our networks to talk about failures. We don't have failures, we just have learning opportunities. I like Amy Edmondson's work on failure. She talks about the importance of making intelligent failures. Help them to make intelligent failures. Don't make failures because they didn't do the prep or they didn't think through what they needed to think through. Help them make a failure in an area that no one's had a go and there was no other evidence, and so they get to learn from that and have a whole new area of learning. And finally, reflect with them and help them to learn. Actually teach them the process of that action, reflection, guided thinking. That's not necessarily something that's taught in our schools today. I'm not even sure it's taught it's not taught in the theological college that I went to, but it might be taught in others. Action reflection is a really important process that allows them to continue to learn over time from whatever God places in their way. So I wanted to put that before you as an encouragement. And I wanted to encourage you particularly to just maybe even imagine in 3 years' time, if you were sitting in this room and every person sitting in this room had developed 2 or 3 other leaders from your context, people who are living out the things that we're talking about. then this room of, 130, 150 people might be closer to 600 leaders, young leaders, leaders from every different background and ethnicity, who would be able to reach people that you and I could never reach. One of the things that I really loved about some of our micro-church networks was when we kind of found ourselves into little nooks and crannies that I didn't even know existed or that I was never going to be able to reach. One of my favourite ones was a micro-church. We had a young adult come to me one day and say, I want to run a micro-church for the underground creatives of Glen Waverley. And I was like, underground creatives, okay, what are they? And basically, Glen Waverley is a highly academic place. We have some of the best high schools in town. Everybody comes, everybody's academic. And guess what? So am I. I am an academic. I didn't notice that we had more tutoring academies than milk bars until someone pointed it out to me, because that's the pool that I swim in, and I'm okay with that. But there is a whole range of young adults in this area who aren't academic, but they're creative, they're musicians, they're artists, they're musical theatre kids, including my daughter now. They have all these beautiful skills that glorify God in incredible ways, but they were not valued at all within our culture. And this young adult came to me and said she wanted to lead a community, to welcome all of the creatives, to show them that they had a place and a good thing to offer to the world, to celebrate the beauty and the joy of God in this space. And I would have never got there if we hadn't started developing these younger leaders, because I couldn't reach that space. I can't reach that space. I'm a little bit creative, but not like these people are incredible. But I'm an academic. I didn't even see that space wasn't there. If we are going to see the kingdom of God come in all the fullness that he intends for it, then we are going to need to raise the whole fullness of leaders that are going to be able to reach into every crack and crevice of our society. Because we're not going to be able to do it on our own. I wonder what it would look like if we didn't just step people into leadership positions, but we develop them to be these sort of leaders. Leaders who would be able to lead in new ways, in different spaces, much different to us. Leaders with God-given gifts who are able to express them freely. People with such a deep relationship with Jesus that even when they hit the really hard times, they hang on. Maybe by a fingernail, but they hang on. People with such a healthy view of themselves and their need for others that they don't work as solo innovative flyers, but they work in teams and they build support networks around themselves. People with an ability to see where God is at work and join him there, whatever that might look like. People with an ability to just learn and reflect and change on the road, to build the plane as it's going, as we were talking about this afternoon. What if our theological colleges value developing leaders like this? What if our churches worked at developing leaders like this? What if we raised humble, God-fearing leaders who responded to his invitation to co-create something new with him with yes? Yes, Lord Jesus. May we be leaders like this. May we raise leaders like this. May it be so. Amen.